Dallas on keys this morning, first time. Well done. Yeah, good job. Wonderful. I hope I don't go out with too big of a bang. I tried that last week. Went bang into the back of a car. How many of you know it pays to look where you're going when you ride your bike? Eyes straight ahead. Hey, is everyone good? Good to see you all. We've got a big, I just said our NEF community's not here this morning. I don't know where they are, but gee, we missed them, don't we? And well, it's great to see you, and I hope you've had a good week. And we're in for a great morning. You want to turn your Bibles to the book of where? The book of? Where we've been focusing lately? Come on, that's it, Hebrews. It's called the coffee chapter. Hebrews, that's all right. Oh, groan. It's terrible, isn't it? Did you like that, Ali? Wasn't that bet you never heard that one before. That's new. Not. Can I just add my welcome to everybody here this morning, whether you're here, you're a regular, it's a part of the rhythm of your life. So glad that you're here. Every one of you are incredibly important, and just love the fact that we get the chance to pastor this church, and we love our church and we love you, people in it. And maybe you're new here this morning, really glad you're here as well. And our hope is, as Ben said, that you can really find a place to connect here. And, people aren't looking for a friendly church, they're looking for friends. And we want to be that kind of church as best as we can. You've got to help us with that by making yourself available, staying back and having a chance to say hello when you feel you're ready to do that. But we're so glad that you're here today. And hi everyone online on the live stream this morning. Well, we've been talking about faith is a road trip. Faith is a road trip, and it's been quite a road trip. And what is road trip faith? Road trip faith is faith that will last a lifetime. Faith that's going to carry you through every moment in life. How many of you know this is not heaven? Sorry to disappoint you. It's going to come a time where it's our ultimate great hope, isn't it? That one day all tears will be wiped. There's a reason why it says all tears will be wiped away. It's because we have tears here on earth, don't we? So it's not heaven. But we have kind of a faith that can carry us through every moment and situation in life. And that's the kind of faith we're talking about. So faith is not an event, but faith is a lifestyle, because the righteous shall live by faith. That's the message. That's what we've been talking about. And one of the big ideas that we've talked about, and I've maybe even overemphasized it, and I'm going to finish up with that this morning. And that is, faith is not based on an outcome, faith is based on a someone. And I want to try and land that this morning, and maybe it hasn't landed for you yet, but maybe it will today. But before I do that, so we've been working through chapter 11 of Hebrews, which is the faith chapter, which of course has the heroes of faith. But I want to just remind you of what the book of Hebrews is actually written for, what the whole idea and need for the book of Hebrews was to be written. They're a little unsure of who wrote it. Some think it was the Apostle Paul. That's a little unclear, so it's a little irrelevant, but it's there. It's been written with a purpose. And the reason it was written to the Hebrew people, hence it's called Hebrews. It was written to the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, people who'd become Christians. They'd left their Judaistic roots, their faith of their forefathers, if you like, and they believed in Jesus. They believed that Jesus was the Messiah. And they put their faith in Jesus. And as a result, they were ostracized by their fellow Hebrew brothers. Because they had abandoned the traditional faith of their fathers, if you like. And so they were persecuted by their own people, but they were also persecuted in general. And so they were people who were suffering a lot of persecution of all kinds on all sides. And things weren't turning out necessarily the way that they thought things would turn out. You've ever been there? And as a result, they were some of them were giving up. They were becoming discouraged. They were thinking about abandoning their community, and they were actually thinking about abandoning faith in general. Have we made a mistake? It's been so long, this is not turning out. I never expected this to happen. Who's ever been in that situation where you thought, I never thought this would happen to me? And now they're starting to ask questions like, what good is my faith? We're good people. Why are bad things happening to us? I thought things would turn out different to this. How many know that's an age-old human question? Why is this happening? Why is God allowing this to happen? In fact, we see that probably made very real in here in chapter 10, verse 32, just up to 35. Listen to what it says. This kind of gives you some perspective of the whole book. Remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when they put their trust in Jesus, when you stood your ground in a great contest in the face of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property because you knew that you yourselves had a better and lasting possession, or you had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence. So can you see the message? For it will be richly rewarded. Can you see the message of Hebrews? Written to a discouraged people, written to people who are thinking about giving up and quitting. And so the message of Hebrews is stay in faith. And basically you've got to take a long-term view here and stay in faith till the end. And so this is what this book is all about. And so Hebrews 11 is a panorama. It's a view of people who've gone before them, and the writer is trying to give them a longer-term perspective. And so he talks about the heroes of faith, which we've talked about. And they talk about Abraham and Rahab and Joshua and the Israelites. And they're held up as examples to inspire us in our faith by looking at their faith. And it shows that the key for the readers not to give up and to making it is really this. If you're going to make it, if you're not going to give up, you've got to live by faith and not by sight. That's how you have to live. You can't live your Christian life just based on your current circumstance and on what is going on around you at the moment. But you have to see something better. You have to believe. You've got to believe in something that you can't see. You hear me this morning? And that message is true to us today. And so these heroes of faith, they faced incredible odds, and yet they believed. And yet they believed in what they couldn't see was greater than even what they could see. And so there's the message. And so today, I want to bring this to a conclusion, and I want to be as practical as I possibly can, because Hebrews chapter 11 then leads into Hebrews chapter 12. You guys are geniuses. And so that's the context of this. That's the context of Hebrews. Don't forget that. That's what it's written to. And so he's been holding up these people of faith, and then he gets to Hebrews chapter 12, and then he says this: therefore, when a therefore is there, you need to look and see what it is. Therefore, okay, in other words, he's saying what I'm about to say to you now is predicated on what I've been telling you. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. That sounds like a road trip, doesn't it? Let us fix our eyes. Everyone say, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, whom for the joy before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men so that you do not grow weary and lose heart. Some have said that those three verses still belong in chapter 11. But you can see how it all ties together, can't you? All comes together. So there's an instruction here for us this morning from these few verses. There's a focus that we need to have. In fact, my message this morning is called the focus of faith. The focus of faith. There's an instruction here. And there's of what we need to focus on if we're going to have faith that's going to last for the entire road trip. Life. And so they're here. They're all there. And so the first one is quite simple. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Now, we've been talking about them, haven't we? The first thing we need to focus on is we're asked to look. Let me use the word look instead of focus. We're called to look at the witnesses that have been displayed before us. And it talks about them as a cloud. There's a whole lot. Let me tell you, a cloud, we've only talked about 3 or 4. A cloud is a whole lot more than just a few, isn't it? And so we've only touched on a little bit of Hebrew 11 of the cloud. So let's just jump back there for a minute. Listen to what it says in verse 32. It says, and what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell you. Well, he didn't have time, so he's moving on quickly. We've got just a little bit more time, so I'm going to tell you about a few of them. He says, I don't have time to tell you about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets. So he lists all these men who are just mentioned by name because he's trying to move through them quickly. He's saying, hey, listen, there's so many of them. There's so many of them that lived by faith. And he lists and he does this quick list. He talks about Gideon. Gideon was scared. If you don't know the story, get all these pretty well. You can read about most of these that he's just listed here in the book of Judges. And Gideon's scared and he's hiding from an enemy. How do you know when you're hiding from an enemy, you're usually scared? And then God speaks to him, sends his angel, and he says, hello, you mighty man of valor. And he goes, who, me? and so God says, I want you to deliver my people. And he said, I want you to gather an army. So he gathers an army of 32,000. And God says, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful job, Gideon, but I want you to narrow it down to 300. And he says, are you serious? You want me to fight that Philistine army with 300 people? God says, no, I want you to fight that Philistine army with 300 people and me. How do you know that was living by faith and not by sight? And so you have Gideon, and then he talks about Barak, and you can read about that in Judges 4. Barak was a weak man, but he found his strength. The strength of Barak come through a woman by the name of Deborah. And but even though he was weak, God, when he was prepared to act in faith, God was still able to use him to deliver the people of Israel. And then he mentions Samson. Now, unlike Barak, who was weak, Samson was strong. Except when it come to the fairer sex. Samson was a player. Samson had some moral issues. But when Samson was prepared to operate by faith, God would show up. God would show up. And then if you read the story again, you can read in Judges at the end of Samson's life. At the end of Samson's life, Samson brought more defeat to the enemies of Israel than he did for the rest of his entire life put together. I think that's a message to some of you today. And so Samson, he had issues going on. And then he mentions Jephthah. Jephthah was the son of a prostitute. Come from an incredibly dysfunctional family. He was the shame of his family. His father had a wife who had children, and yet his father had slept with a prostitute, and Jephthah was the result of that relationship with the prostitute. So how many know that Jephthah was the shame of his father and his brothers and his sisters? They reject him and send him away. And even though those closest to him rejected him, and even though he come from a dysfunctional family, when he was prepared to operate in faith, God was able to use him. Wow. These stories are wonderful. You can read about them. Read the Bible. It's interesting. David, we've talked about him, but yeah, David's young and he's inexperienced, and yet even though he was young and inexperienced, he was able to take down a Goliath. Why? Because he had faith in God. He didn't look at the size of the problem, but he looked at the size of his God. Samuel, the prophet, all these names that he just mentions them quickly. Samuel was a prophet. We heard about him a few weeks ago, but Samuel had some issues going on in his own life. His own 2 boys didn't serve God. And yet when he was prepared to act in faith, i.e. God looks on the heart, man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. When Samson was able to look through the eyes of faith, God used him to anoint the next king of Israel. And so he lists all these people very quickly. And the reason I list them to you and just taken that moment to unfold some of them is for the simple reason that they're all people with problems. They're all people with weaknesses. They're all people with massive flaws. And yet, when they operated in faith, God was able to use them and they made it into the hall of faith. And that's an incredible encouragement to me today, because it doesn't matter what your past is or what your faults have been. If you're prepared to act in faith from today, you can become a man and woman of faith. Every one of you. And so we can't just leave it there. We've got to read on just a little bit. But they were all men who learned, and women who learned to walk by faith and not just by sight. And then it goes on, look what it says. This is what faith accomplished. Who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. Who shut the mouths of lions. Who might that be? Daniel. Quenched the fury of the flames. Who might that be? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Thrown in. I love that. To me, they displayed the greatest faith of all. Our God is able to deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow the knee. That's faith. They quenched the fury of the flames and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weaknesses were turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Wow, that's unprecedented power, isn't it? That's amazing. It says women received back their dead, raised to life again through faith. Some incredible things happen through faith. You're feeling your faith lifted this morning as you start reading through this. All right, you ready for this? Let's keep reading in verse 35. Others, everyone say others. Let's read about the others. Others were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned. They were sawed in two, and they were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and in holes in the ground. Let's change the mood in the room. That's not the testimony that we want to hear. Listen to me this morning. Anybody who tells me if you live for Christ that you'll never suffer, never have to deal with pain, they've lied to you. That's half the story. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, we can't just read half the story, can we? We have to have the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God, yes? And here we have others. Everyone say others. They were actually penalized and suffered because of their faith. The reason that many of them suffered, in fact, almost exclusively the reason why most of them were suffering was because of their faith. It says in there that they refused release. That means that they had release offered to them. What does that look like? Oh, if you just, you can be a Christian at work, but just tone that down a bit. I'm bringing it into the modern day vernacular, of course. But just tone things down. If you stop professing Christ, you can go free. How many of you felt that kind of pressure? Maybe if you just don't profess Christ, we'll give you the pay rise. You can be a Christian, you can be religious, you can go to your church, but just don't go bringing your Christian values into this place. But they were actually refused release. Why? Because it says they saw a better resurrection. In other words, they saw something better. And faith always, no matter what is going on in your life, always sees something better. They knew that this wasn't the final say. Whatever happened, whatever was going to happen to them, this wasn't the final say. God had something better. Their ultimate faith wasn't in temporary outcomes, but in an eternal someone who they believed had someone better. That is, they were living by faith and not by sight. And it says, verse 39 says, they were all, everyone say all. All. Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the ones listed, all, and the others. They were all commended for their faith. They all had different outcomes, but they all were commended for their faith. Who can see this morning? Because they were all trusting in the one that they couldn't see, that he had something better. They were all, everyone say all. They were all commended for their faith. And as I look at the cloud of witnesses this morning, I'm inspired by them all. How about you? I'm inspired by the great stories of Abraham and Joshua and Moses, and I'm inspired by the miracles and all the things that took place because men and women dared to believe God for things that they couldn't see. They refused just to live by sight, and they chose to live by faith. I'm inspired by some of the amazing outcomes, but let me tell you, I'm just as inspired by the others who were prepared even to trust God even unto death. So I'm glad that I can take a moment and I can look at the cloud of witnesses. They died in faith. They died still believing. They died believing in something better. That's faith, my friend. And so we're to look at the cloud. We're to look at all of the cloud of witnesses. But then there's a second thing it leads us to. It says, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us, who's us? That'd be us. It's writing to the Hebrew people. That's us, written to us this morning. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily entangles and run the race with perseverance. Firstly, we look at the cloud. Secondly, we look at us. We take a moment and we look at ourselves. If we're going to run the race of faith, if we're going to have faith, if we're going to have a faith that carries us through all of life, we have to take a moment to look at the cloud, remind us of those around us who've gone before, but we also need to take a moment, we need to look at us, look at ourselves. And we need to lay aside every weight. And I'm not going to spend a long time in this because I want to get to the main point. You see, two things there, lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily entangles. Firstly, weights. Weights are not sin. Weights are just good things that are weighing us down. And there's things in our life that they're not sinful, but they are weights. And the picture that the writer is actually painting here is, he actually changes, he has a metaphor of a race. I've talked about a road trip, but he actually uses the metaphor of a race. And the last thing you need in a marathon and a long distance race is the last thing you need is weight, right? And the runners of the day that used to compete in those things, they knew all about it. I mean, some of the outfits that we see today in athletics are pretty skimpy. Well, who can't forget Matt Shervington? Anyway, we won't worry about Matt Shervington. But let me tell you, the runners of the day in those days, to lay aside every weight, do you know what they used to do? They used to run naked. Crowds used to come for miles. They were popular events. But the point is this. The writer is saying, listen, the last thing you need to run your life of faith, to continue on your road trip, is weights. And there are some things, what might be a weight for one is not a weight to another. So they're not talking about sins. For me, don't laugh, but for many years, it was motorbikes. And for a long time, for about 10 years, the space of 10 years, while through my youth pastor years, I'm not having a go at you, Al, because you haven't got one, but through my youth pastor years and whatever, I went without a motorbike for the simple reason I thought that was actually going to be a weight and hindrance, because I loved motorbikes. I wanted to race motorbikes. It was my thing. It was kind of, and I decided that for the next, I was just going to completely give myself, and I just put it aside. Was there anything wrong with motorbikes? Well, that's open to debate, isn't it? Absolutely not, but here's the point. Some things in your life, they're just weights. They're not bad things. They're just weights. And so it makes it simple to sometimes figure out what you do and don't do as a follower of Jesus. The question is not, can I do this or not? Can I get away with it or not? Is this right or is it wrong? Am I allowed to or am I not? No. The question is this going to help me or hinder me in my race? Or is it likely going to be a weight? And so if I think that's more than likely it's going to be a weight, so I choose to live without it. Does that make sense? Paul said to me, everything is permissible. In 1 Corinthians 6, he says everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. And you've got to figure out okay, it might be, yeah, I'm allowed to do that. Yeah, no one's going to tell me no, no, but the question is, it's the wrong question. Is it beneficial? If God is calling you and God is doing things in your life, there's a faith journey He's taking you on, you've got to ask yourself the question. You've got to step up to a new level and think, well, okay, it might be okay for them, but it's not okay for me, because for me it's a weight. So lay aside every weight and the sin. If weights slow you down, let me tell you, sin will almost trip you up in your tracks. It actually says, sin that so easily entangles you. Actually talks about besetting sin, the old version. But it's like, anyone ever heard the old story? You put a frog in a kettle. A frog in a fry pan. French do that all the time. What are you complaining about? You put a frog in a thing of cold water and boil it. If you turn it on, if you throw it into hot water, don't go home and try this, please. It's dead instantly. But if you put it in a thing of cold water, that's not right. I didn't say that right. If you put it in hot water, if the frog it'll jump straight out, right? Because it knows it's in hot water. You put a frog in cold water and light it and slowly heat it up, the frog won't know it's in hot water until it's too late and it's dead. I got that right in the end, didn't I? Woohoo! But that's the way sin works. It entangles you. It will always take far more from you than you ever thought it would. It always takes you further than you ever thought you would go. But that's what it does. And so lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily, everyone say easily entangles you. And sometimes we've just got to let that thing, we just got to get rid of that and let that go. But here's the thing today. I don't want to have anything in my life, weights or sin, that's going to stop me from my road trip of faith. If I've got any friends there this morning. Okay, but that's that one. Here's the last one. This is the most important. So surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. It's the first thing you look at. Second thing you look at is weights and sin. Okay, that's yourself. That's you. Third thing, and most important, it says this, and I love this. Verse 3. Let us, everyone say, that'd be me. Say it with a bit of conviction. That'd be me. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. Wow. The most important thing you need to look at, the most important thing you need to take notice of, the most important thing, yes, you need to focus on, if you're going to last the road trip of faith with faith, is you've got to keep your eyes on Jesus. You've got to keep your eyes on Jesus. Who can see how this all ties together through all that He's told us? Then He comes and He brings it together and He goes, okay, cloud of witnesses, take care of yourself, make sure you're keeping your own life on track. But here's the most important thing. Fix your eyes on Jesus. And here we've done the full circle. We started off by me saying our faith is not based on an outcome, it's based on a someone. The substance of our faith is Jesus. He's the substance of our faith. So He's the one we fix our eyes on. Because number one, He's the ultimate faith hero. Who'd believe that today? He's the ultimate hero of faith. But here we have it. We've done the full circle. He's the substance of our faith. He's the someone of our faith. And the writer is instructing us to ultimately we fix our eyes on Jesus. See, here's the thing. If we spend all our time looking at the cloud of witnesses, we start to compare ourselves. I'm not an Abraham. I'm not a Joshua. I'm not a Moses. Wish I was a Samuel. Or Samson, whatever. I'm not a Gideon. I'm not a Barak or whatever. And they, if we're honest, they can all seem so far removed from us. Isn't that true? And then if we read about the others, which I've just mentioned this morning, we look at the others and we start thinking about, really, they did that? Wow, I'm not sure if I could have that kind of faith. And we can start to compare. So that's if that's what we're looking at. If we just look at ourselves, if we start looking at just our weight and our sin, and that becomes our focus, I've got to stop sinning. I've got to stop sinning. Got to stop sinning. I mean, if you come to church and all you heard was, you've just got to knock some of those things off. You got to stop. You got to stop looking at porn. You got to stop lying. You got to stop doing this and you got to stop doing that. How many know when you walk out, it's like, okay, got to stop this. I've got to stop this. I've got to stop this. Becomes a bit like, I don't know why this is coming to my head, but who remembers the film Forrest Gump? And he's got those calipers on his legs. And remember, it's like, remember that bit where he runs and they all start unlocking and, I love you, Jenny. And he's running, but it's kind of like you can't run because you got all this stuff and you just get so fixated on I've got to focus, I've got to get these things. Let me tell you, you're not going to defeat sin in your life by focusing on it. You're not. Let me say that again. You're not going to defeat sin in your life by focusing on it. What's the answer? You've got to fix your eyes on Jesus. You're going to defeat it in your life. The only way you're going to defeat sin in your life is by loving Jesus more than the sin. And that's why so many of us get discouraged and we give up because you've spent all your life like focusing on I'm not going to do that anymore. Or you kind of like, you look at you read about the heroes of faith, I can't be a David, I'm trying to be a David, I'm trying to be a David, I can't be a Moses, I can't get rid of these weights and these sins, and it crushes you. And the message to the Hebrews today is the same message that's to us today. If you're discouraged, if you feel like you're a failure, if you feel like things aren't going the way that you would like them to go in life, or you're not, you feel like you can't be one of those heroes of faith, what's the answer? Fix your eyes on Jesus. What is it? Fix your eyes on, come on, one more time. What is it? Fix your eyes on Jesus. And it won't be just like, old Forrest Gump with those bits falling off, but it's kind of like you'll be able to do things and achieve things, and God can do things through you far more when you fix your eyes on Jesus. It's like the difference between a high jumper and a pole vaulter. A high jumper can actually jump about 8 feet. Who couldn't? Record's about 8 feet, I checked. But a high jumper just relies on his own strength and what he or she can do. But what can a pole vaulter do? A pole vaulter can jump about 20 feet. Because it has someone else that it's something else that it's relying on. Let me tell you, when you rely on Jesus, when you fix your eyes on Jesus, it'll take you far further than ever when you don't have your eyes fixed on Jesus. You got to fix your eyes on Jesus. Why? Well, I guess, what does that feel like, just in a sense of feeling? You fix your eyes on Jesus because it's about your imagination. It's like, what pictures, what are you seeing? What's captured your imagination? And if your eyes on scenarios and what could happen and this might happen, and you've got Jesus on audio and you've got the future on video. I think we need to turn that around. So you fix your eyes on Jesus. Make him your focus. You start fixing your eyes on Jesus. Why? Because he's the author and the perfecter of your faith. Just look at this for a minute. What does that mean? It means that he is your champion. it's like he's your arch ego. He's your second self. He's the one that you would have liked you to have been. It means he stands in our place. He stands in our place, and in standing in our place, he took the full penalty of sin and frees us, because it's almost as if it frees us almost as if we had taken that full penalty ourselves. Who can see this morning? He lived a perfect life. He lives a completely righteous, perfect life. And that righteousness is given to us. It's almost like we had lived that perfect life. It's if we had done this. And so we are perfected in him, and in him there is no condemnation. But this is actually the foundation of faith. He's the author and the perfecter. Think about this for a minute. If you think about people of the Islam faith, Muhammad, the people, Buddhists, they have Buddha, and Hindus have Krishna. Krishna and Muhammad and Buddha, they're all authors of faith. They all start people on a journey of faith. If you want to get to God, this is the way you do it. This is what you do. I'll start you, but it's now over to you. You've got to complete it. But when it comes to our faith, no, Jesus is not just the author of our faith, but he's the finisher of our faith. He completes our faith. It's done. He's done the probation. He's off the P's. He's fully licensed. It's all done. It's all his. He's not only the author of our faith, but he's the finisher of our faith. That's amazing. And when you start to let that sink in, you start to understand the importance of why we look to Jesus. Why would we look to Jesus? Because he's writing to people that are discouraged, in pain, going through stuff they never thought, why me? Why me? And the question we'll inevitably end up asking when we go through stuff in life is why? Why me? Why this? Why? Do I deserve this? Is this fair? What did I do to deserve this? Well, there's only two possible answers you can come up with. Either, I do deserve this, I'm a bad person, I deserve this, and you'll be crushed. Or, I don't deserve this, this shouldn't be happening to me, and you'll become hard and bitter. Both of those answers will lead you to discouragement. Both of those answers will lead you to give up. But for a Christian, when we look at Jesus and we see he's the author and the perfecter, we know that we're not good enough, right? We know that it's all him, right? And so there's a sense where I do deserve this, but what's happening to me is not punishment. God's not doing this to me because Jesus was my punishment. He took it all. Who believes that this morning? He took it all. He's the author and the perfecter of our faith. I've got to close. But then it says, consider him. Take a moment, just consider. Consider him. Fix our eyes. You get fixated. You know, when you're fixated on him, you're not fixated on something else. And this is, if there's a message this morning, it's this: we've got to get fixated on Jesus. Church, listen to me. Whatever situation you find yourself in life, you've got to get fixated on him this morning. Not fixated on whatever's going on, not fixated on the side. Get fixated on him. Let that be your fixation. Like Peter in the water, walking. He's doing all right while his eyes were on who? And then what happened? He started getting his eyes off and he started looking at everything else around him. And this is not a call to live in denial. This is not a call to ignore everything. Nope, nothing happening here, nothing to see here. No, it's not denial. But it's knowing where our fixation is. It's knowing what we're focused on. So we fix our eyes on Jesus because he's the author and the perfecter. And then we consider him. It says, who for the joy set before him. Can I have the team up, please? Whom for the joy set before him endured the cross. We're coming up to Easter. Easter's going to be great. We've got 2 great preachers on Friday with Keith and Tamara. They're going to be bringing the word on Friday. It's going to be an outstanding Friday service. And then Easter Sunday, we've got a great Easter Sunday planned. But here's where I'm going. It says, whom from the joy set before him. The sight before him was the cross. But faith saw beyond the cross. On the Friday, he saw the Sunday. That's why he's a champion of faith. On the Friday, he saw the Sunday. He trusted the Father for the outcome. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Come on, you can do better than that, church. That's pretty cool, isn't it? He's our champion this morning. He's the author and the perfecter. But whom from the joy set before him. What does that mean? It means he saw us. He saw you and I worshiping him. He saw people all around the globe, down through the ages, knowing him, connecting with his Father because of what he was about to do. Can anything good possibly come out of this? Sight would say, I'm going back fishing, it's all over. But faith said, hey, there's a Sunday coming. And you need to know this morning, church, that you were the joy that was set before him. You and I were the joy that was set before him. In his pain, he was cut off from the Father. In our pain, he wants to connect us closer to the Father. In his pain, in his pain, it says, whom from the joy set before him endured. In his pain, he was looking at you. And in our pain, and in our trial, he wants you to look at him. Where are your eyes this morning, church? Where are your eyes? What's going on in your life? Where are your eyes? What are you looking at? What are you fixated on? Fixated on. If things are good or if things are bad, look to Jesus. Feel that he's not doing enough for you? Feel that God doesn't seem to be coming? Look to Jesus. I think when I look at him on the cross, I think he's done enough. If you're suffering pain or loss at the moment, look to Jesus. If you're not sure that God loves you, look to Jesus. If you're thinking of giving up, look to Jesus. He endured the cross. If you can't see any good coming out of this situation you're in, look to Jesus. Maybe you think it's punishment or something you're wrong. Hey, look to Jesus. He took it all. If you're sick this morning, if you need a miracle in your life, look to Jesus. If you're in need this morning, look to Jesus. In every circumstance, you can look to Jesus. You can trust him. He's the substance of our faith. He's the source of our faith because he is faithful. That's road trip faith. Come on, church, stand with me this morning. Look to Jesus. Look to Jesus. Are you looking to Jesus this morning? Where are your eyes? What do you need this morning to intentionally do? Doesn't mean we ignore what's happening in our life. It says Abraham recognized his own body as dead. We all know what that means, don't we? Things weren't going too good for old Abraham in that department. He said he recognized his body as dead. He didn't ignore the facts, but he believed God. His eyes are on Jesus. So this morning, church, the message is fix your eyes on Jesus. Come on, what's going on in your life right now? What do you need this morning? What's going on? Fix your eyes on Jesus. Come on, just for a moment, readjust your focus, readjust your gaze. Say, Jesus, I'm focusing on you this morning. There's something better. There's something better. I'm focusing on you this morning, Jesus. Father, I pray you'd give us that kind of faith. Faith that is focused on you. You know, church, he's given us a way to remind ourselves every week or every time we gather how we can focus and keep our gaze on him. We take communion together. You got your cups? Come on. Just give them a little shake. Let's take a moment and focus on him. See him this morning. See his body that was broken. See his body that was marred. Jesus, we thank you. We thank you. Father, help us to put our focus on you again this morning. As the old translation said, it says, looking away unto Jesus. Some things you got to look away. Father, we look away and we look to you this morning. We take the bread that represents of your broken body. Come on, let's eat together with thanks. We take the cup. We take the cup. As I said, we look away. We look away. We look away from our failures and our sin and our brokenness. And we look under Jesus. We look under his righteousness. He's our champion. Is he a champion this morning, church? He's the author and the perfecter. Come on, say this morning, he's my perfecter. He's made me perfect in him. So maybe this morning you've never committed your life to Jesus. Maybe you've been trusting in you've been trusting in yourself to be your own Savior. This morning, friend, if we could save ourselves, we wouldn't be taking communion together. Jesus wouldn't have had to die on the cross. But he died on the cross because there was no other way that we could be saved. Maybe you want to take communion today for the first time saying, Jesus, I want to trust you. I put my trust in you. Come on, let's drink together this morning. Thank you, Jesus. Come on, just begin to thank him this morning. Thank him for being not only the author, but the perfecter of our faith. Come on, we thank you this morning, Jesus. We thank you, Jesus.
Shout Jesus from